showed me why. Instead of asking why, start asking why not. Time flies when you're having fun. Time flies when you're lying in the sun. Bit by bit, the older that we get, the faster it tick, 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 ticks. Time flies. Whoa, whoa, time flies.
Time flies. Thank you, Mr. Beck, for that fine intro song we play every week. Today we've got, I think, are you a three-timer now, Champ? I think he's our first three-timer. Well, Tom Farr would be a three-timer. But Champ Herren's back with us today. Now, that officially, that would be Cline Champion Herren the third. So everybody around here knows him as Champ. And he's sort of a noted historian of Webster County and Ozark artifacts, and pretty much a purveyor of all kinds of things. Farmer, and I don't know, you had a resume one time with about 15 different things on it. I don't know, insurance and of course the most famous thing you're known for is the son of Barbara.
Yeah, isn't that the truth? Mom.
But anyway, good to have Champ back. He really has done a lot of research on history of, I kind of call it old Webster County history. And so we're going to talk about that today. Specifically, Webster County's had 3 shootings, or Marshfield at least has had 3 shootings. And
hold on, they've had a lot more. We're just going to talk about 3.
Okay, well, we're going to talk about the 3.
A couple of them, there needs to be a few more funerals to happen. Then we can talk about them.
Oh, well, okay. All right. Anyway, let's get started. Just as a refresher, Champ, for those that didn't get to see you previously, tell them just a little bit about yourself and briefly your family and what brought you to this world.
I'm a 7th generation Webster Countyan. I believe that's right. Yeah, that's right. And I'm the son of Cline and Barbara Herren, who started Century Realty in Webster County Land Title. And 1994 graduate of Marshfield High School, and currently farm. We own penny pinchers over on Jackson Street. Stop by and
see his wife Sarah.
Yeah, Sarah over there. Sarah will hook you up. Follow us on Facebook if you get a chance, and then also. I spend a lot of time writing and researching, working on a couple of different things right now. Working on a local history book of kind of crime, because everybody loves crime.
And I think it should be noted too that you've been very instrumental or very involved in the looking back section of the Marshfield Mail that
we just completed a year.
Yeah. If you notice that article, that piece of the newspaper used to be a fairly small article. And now it's pretty much a whole page, and Champ and some others, I think, from the Historical Society, but predominantly, I think, with your leadership.
Linda Dickinson and Connie Perryman and Carmelita Ty Scotter and Leslie Cantrell, who's president, all contribute a certain part of it, and it's a group project. Yeah. I just happen to edit it.
I see. Okay.
So
in a collaboration with the Marshfield Mail, of course.
Yeah, and we get it published and sent in. So that's been first of all, we have never avoided anything, and we've tried to keep some current themes. So when you start talking about local food in today's sense, there's a huge, what we would consider now, it wasn't at the time because they thought they were going to ship everything out on the railroad, but there was a huge local food movement here. Even down to the fact that we were canning and shipping out tomatoes, apples, strawberries, by the barrel, by the package, carton, etc. But when you think about that, that's something that has changed, and now we're going to see that start coming back.
I think it will too. And of course, we've had Pat Abbott on our show, and Pat's father, Mr. Lane, had a produce market where Marshfield Mill, old school mill now it's called, where their office area is actually the same building. And in those days you're talking about, in the 30s, maybe the 40s, he would buy that produce from the farmers and resell that and ship it out on trains. He didn't necessarily have a retail store there. It was wholesale brokerage, and bought those products, those fruit and produce products.
Well, if you think about it, if you had a large family, it was not unusual for you to have a half acre of potatoes.
Hmm.
It was not unusual for you to have, you know, 3 or 4 acres of tomatoes
Right.
and take them to a cannery.
Just like the Amish do today.
Similar,
Yeah.
yeah.
Actually, the Amish have a produce auction over there at C&P Highway, which, by the way, we should mention last night, the storm,
Mhm.
a tremendous amount of devastation in that Amish community there at C&P. Most of you know that I have an Amish crew that I've worked with for about 12 years, and some of their family members were affected by that. One particular home I know was nearly destroyed, and barns and silo and so forth. And so that's all in that C&P Highway area over in southeast of here. And but the produce auction that's over there in that same vicinity, they have weekly, almost daily sales in the summertime. And just what you're saying, a lot of that produce goes to wholesale. It's sold wholesale to
Well, sure.
markets and
Sure. If you're,
farmers distributors.
I know of restaurants who go down there.
Yeah.
And there's different things. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So, but today we're going to talk predominantly about
Killings.
yeah, killings. And so you've done quite a bit of research with that, and so why don't you just kind of take this thing and run with
Okay.
it and share what you've got on that.
Well, there are three I'm prepared to talk about today. Let me just say that between the Civil War, between the founding of Webster County and about 1930, it really was not unusual. In fact, there's one story today that we're going to go that's even after that. It's not unusual to have people shooting people. And strangely enough, getting away with it a whole lot of the time. There are, throughout the 1890s in Webster County, and I'm working on putting a lot of these into 2,000 and 3,000 word bunches and putting them out. There are just some horrible bloody murders, mainly in my neighborhood out there in Dallas Township. And I mean, just blood, just plain old premeditated murder.
And that's
And nothing really happens to anybody.
that was their form of justice, though.
I don't think in some of this, I don't think it was any justice. I think it was just, you can wear down the court system to avoid the gallows.
I see. Yeah.
And so we'll talk about a little bit of that today. There's also, the first one I want to talk about is I wrote about a fella named Colonel Paul in one of my articles, maybe a year ago now. And Colonel Paul was a real character. Now, he was a very brave man. He rode ammunition and powder up to the front to the Union Artillery at Pea Ridge. He was in the Home Guard. He got commissioned as a lieutenant after Pea Ridge. And he ended up not even being a real colonel. He ended up being a brevet lieutenant colonel of Home Guard and militia. So he had this thing called the enrolled militia later in the war, which was just anybody that was available. That wasn't in active duty. You could kind of you go serve some time in the fort or go work out at Sand Springs.
Was that part of what they called the Missouri militia?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. The Home Guards were a separate thing.
Yeah, okay.
The Home Guards were started the very first of the war, and then they disbanded when like in August of that year, and then they went in the regular units were raised.
I know my three great and two great grandfathers served in the Missouri militia.
Mm-hmm.
Allegedly worked or fought at the Battle of Sand Springs. They were Dallas County. They were the Dallas County Regiment. I guess they were set up by counties.
Well, they would send you they would send you to one of these forts around Springfield.
I see.
Including Marshfield.
Yeah.
There was all kinds of people in and out of town. But anyway, Colonel Paul in November of 1863, he's an officer. And this occurs, from the best I can tell, across from the museum where the Christian church now is. Mm-hmm. And so Colonel Paul kills a man named Harvey, I think his name is Thomas Harvey, who had just killed another man named Marion Smith. Now, I don't know if these were soldiers. I don't know if Colonel Paul would have still been in the Army at the time. He would have been probably a captain.
This was during the Civil War.
Yeah, this is November of 1863.
1863. Okay.
So, I've read a couple of just versions of this, and it sounds like Harvey shoots Marion Smith, and then Colonel Paul just shoots him, kills him dead. That Marion Smith lingered until the next morning. Now, what makes this whole thing strange is that all of a sudden, in February of 1870, the grand jury rendered an indictment of murder on Colonel Paul, or Thomas K. Paul, for the murder of Harvey.
6+ years later.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, so the case was heard at the very end of August 1870. R.W. Fian was judge. There were James Rush was maybe prosecutor or maybe defended him. Here's the thing. In the intervening time, Colonel Paul, very involved in Republican politics, along with Rush, Fian, who were originally Republicans, but switched, and I'll explain that. There was something after the Civil War called the Drake Constitution, and the Drake Constitution was horrible because anybody who was even accused of having Southern sympathies could be stripped of their civil rights. And so there was a Marshfield Republican Convention where the Marshfield delegation, which I think would be the Webster County delegation, broke away from the radical Republican Party. And in the end, Rush, Fian, there were, and I know those two for sure, switched because I've seen it in the papers. They're all of a sudden running as Democrats.
Now, when you talk about the
Republicans.
radical Republic, would that be the party of Lincoln?
Yeah, that's the radical period after the Civil War. We're going to punish the South.
Yeah.
We're going to punish the South. And Missouri put in this horrible constitution that you didn't even have to, like it had to be local agreement that you either had, if you had Confederate sympathies, we could strip you of your civil rights. Yeah. If we wanted to let on like you had Confederate sympathies, or in the case of the fella out at Pleasant View out there, murder you, that's all part of that Reconstruction period, which was just horrible in Missouri. So Colonel Paul gets acquitted the same court term that Charles and Hannah Waller, who killed the Newlands down at Seymour, get indicted for the murder of so-and-so. But they are gone. They get indicted for it, but they aren't here.
The Wallers allegedly was the first legal hanging.
It is the first legal hanging. Because I don't know of any other.
Right.
There's a lynching, but that's not a legal hanging. Right. The Wallers, that happened over north of Seymour, and that's a wild tale. So part of what I really like about these is the newspapers at the time give you some idea, and you have to piece them together to get the full story. But it is so much more than what's in what we were just talking about, the Floyd Waters George book, which I'm going to make a public service announcement. There are so few of these left. Go to the museum and get you one. You can mark up. You can go over it with highlighter. You can use it as a coffee cup coaster like I have.
Tell them, give them the background on that book. Why
this was for the 1955 centennial, and it has large parts of it plagiarized from Goodspeed. I mean, let's just be Goodspeed's history of LA's history of all the counties, of the world, really. But there's lots of interesting things in here. You were mentioning there's good cyclone coverage in here. Pretty good Civil War. It's not as detailed, but I don't know that she would have had the ability to get really dive down and narrow down on details like we do today
Right.
with technology.
She was Jack Waters' aunt. She worked
Mhm.
at the Marshfield
She
Mail.
was an owner.
Her own, yeah, I guess her brother Ballard owned it, or was the predominant owner.
She was an owner as well. She was
Their parents would have owned it, I suppose, initially.
yeah.
But yeah, it's a good book, and like you said, there's not many of them. I'm very happy that I have one, but the work
Whose name's written in the front of yours?
I don't think there is one.
Your cousin Dale has Earl Shields's.
Oh, yeah.
I've got Horace Dameron's
I
and
don't-
Grandpa Dugan's.
I don't think there is a name in this one. I don't know.
Oh shoot!
Yeah. But the workbooks that you said the Historical Society had made of these were copies that people can purchase now, and like you said, you can write on them and make notes.
So the whole thing about the Colonel Paul, and the problem is there are not a lot of corroborating sources. The Springfield papers at the time mentioned that he has actually been, he's been acquitted of murder, but there's no detail. And I'm having a hard time figuring out why 6.5 years later
Yeah.
he's indicted and tried for murder.
Yeah.
Not that he didn't deserve it. He was a rascal in his own right.
But you got to remember that politics played a huge role in society, just like it does today.
Well, he would have been
Yeah.
a Republican who they would have had control of everything at the time, all of the county.
Yeah, but if he ticked off if he made an advance toward one of the politicians' wives, or I mean, all those kinds of things still in play, just
Well,
like they are, later years. I think the other thing that we need to remember is we're still talking about territory that is predominantly not developed. I mean, Webster County was only 8 years old at the time.
Yeah.
Marshfield was only 7 years old.
There
at
really
the time.
have been people here for 20 years.
Well, there had been, but
yeah,
but
But that's not a long time.
beyond the city, the
Right.
town though, it would have been territory that was just uncivilized
Right.
almost. And I guess even still Native Americans would be floating around here and there, and
yeah, that there were some.
because the westward movement of the Trail of Tears and all hadn't happened yet.
By the way, if you have any information on the family of Light Moon, get a hold of me. Light Moon is a character that keeps popping up in the paper, and it's alluded to the fact that he's a Native American.
Yeah.
It's never really said so. I would love to find out more about Light Moon.
Right. Now, newspaper-wise, what would have been in print in those days, in those early days?
So,
Marshfield Mail wasn't actually established yet, right?
no, that's 1893.
Right.
So there was the Tribune and the Chronicle. The Tribune was the Republican paper. The Chronicle was the Democratic paper.
Okay.
The Marshfield Mail really, there's a slight overlap with the Tribune, but it pretty well replaced the Tribune. The Tribune was not much of a paper by the time of the early 1890s. There was the Democrat, which we have. By the way, if you have an old newspaper, like an old newspaper, a Chronicle or something, let me know. We might like to scan it because we're missing certain ones. We're missing all the ones about the ball knobbers riding around the square of Marshfield and the ball knobber trials that were occurring at the Webster County Courthouse.
What era would that have been?
That'd have been in the 1880s, late 1880s.
Okay.
We're missing some of the papers immediately following the Dick Cullen lynching for the murder of Clifford Veershaw. We're missing,
But that information's in this book, the Dick Cullen.
yeah, not all of it though.
Yeah, okay.
There's a whole other site. So here's the one thing I'm really happy about is, yes, she has what happened to Dick Cullen here. Yes, great. There's a whole other backstory to Dick Cullen where he's indicted, or he's going to be indicted for murder, and a horrific murder in Nebraska.
Oh, wow.
There's a story about his father and his family.
Yeah.
Where did his mother actually come from? There's all kinds of tales on that.
And just for clarification, we talked about the first legal and maybe only legal hanging was the family you mentioned, the Waller family from Seymour. Dick Cullen was the lynching, and maybe the only lynching that we know of on
The
top.
only lynching I know of
That
in
occurred-
Webster County.
that occurred vigilante type hanging, and you can just briefly talk to them a little
It
bit.
really made Buffalo jealous because Buffalo, we sent uh, Dick Kazee over there to get tried. He got a change of venue, and they were so happy they were going to finally get him a public hanging, and he committed suicide. We won't talk about him today, but he killed a man in the courthouse at point blank range with a pistol. Another election fracas, if you want to know the truth.
Yeah. Okay.
So, let's see.
Go back to the shootings. So you
Yeah,
started...
so another one, and I've got it here mainly on computer, involves Lee Harmon and Lou Avery. Now, Lee Harmon was the deputy who really got the goods on Dick Cullen. He questioned Dick Cullen while they were at Hiram Shaw's house while they were looking, and they were finding Cullen's tracks to and from about where he committed the deed. The proof that the whole case rested on. And he actually caught Cullen in 2 lies. And it had already been reported to him, and I can't think of by who, I'll have to think about it, but it was somebody in town that Cullen had said, I'll kill the old man and the boy, both. And that's pretty damning. That gets you lynched in 1892.
Yeah.
So,
and the old man referring to who his mother,
Hiram Shaw, the old
his
man,
mother married, right?
Yeah, who lived over in the Temple Baptist neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
He had a small, well, he was an orchardist. He was a nurseryman, and he sold all kinds of trees and grapes and plants. He shot a hot house. Yeah, they came here from
his
Wisconsin.
mother, Cullen's mother, married Shaw. They had the new baby.
They know the baby.
No.
Oh,
okay.
So the Springfield paper loves to say that this baby is the illegitimate son of someone here in town.
I see.
And it's
by his mother.
And the mother drops the baby off at Oliver Wells's house, which would have been right over close to where Dr. Melton's office was, on the other end of your building over here.
Yeah.
He was postmaster. She left the depot and she dropped it off the house. The baby floated around and then ended up with the Shaw family.
Okay.
As old man Shaw did not have any children, and his wife had 2 older daughters at the time. Dick Cullen hadn't arrived.
I see.
He shows up later.
Later on. Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah. So, and he's a fiend, and he comes from a line of fiends.
Mm-hmm.
So what happens here is on the side street, I guess that's Marshall Street on the south side of the square. Evidently, there's a store there, and I'll read you a couple of accounts here. This is from the coroner's jury. Now, what happened is Lee Harmon was city marshal. He had been involved as a deputy sheriff in the Dick Cullen thing. He had recently killed another man, or shot another man, wounded him here in town and he was currently the city council, or the alderman and the mayor were deciding whether they were going to get rid of him. And so him and his brother, Frank, are standing in front of a store in Thompson's office talking to Sig Dugan. Now that's George Sigel Dugan. And he's going to play later into this too, who's a great, great, great uncle of mine. Now, I'm going to read this. As I came back, Sigel Dugan, Frank Harmon, and Lee Harmon were standing in front of Thompson's office. Avery and Harmon, Lou Avery and Harmon, were talking, and from what I heard, thought they were making friends. Soon saw that there were going to be trouble. Heard Frank Harmon call Avery names, and Avery tell Frank not to hit him. Harmon took Avery by the collar with his left hand and drew back like he's going to hit him. Avery jerked away and started to run, and Frank started after him. They got a short distance from the sidewalk. Hold on a minute. Oh, come on. and Harmon started after them. After they got around the corner, the first shot was fired. Lee Harmon had his right hand under his coat as though it was in his hip pocket and kept it that way until he was out of sight and around the corner. As near as I could judge the echo, there were 5 or 6 shots fired. Now, the coroner's jury's all over the place. You have this guy that says that they chased him. Then you have another fella. That was C.P. Amos right there. And this is C.P. Amos. And then he describes it. The first time I saw, they were in the street near Colonel Paul's office door. Now, Colonel Paul had a drugstore and an office right there on Marshall Street, and a door kind of back there where like the Stacy Hopkins beauty shop was right in there. He said, now, so they were near Colonel Paul's office door. They're in the middle of the street, and we're shooting. Mr. Harmon seemed to be backing to the west, Avery advancing toward him. This was Lee Harmon. So you got one where Avery's advancing on him, and it's going to tell you that Harmon's almost forced to shoot him, and the other one where Harmon's chasing him and he shoots him. Anyway, irrespective of which was true, Avery died right over there and was taken into Newt Edmonds' son, who was who had been town constable, took him into Al Edmonds was his name. They took him to his house there, and he died. And so that was the whole thing. Now, so they tried him for murder. Frank's hit, his brother's hit, he's not hit, and so they lock them both up in jail, and they try him for murder, and he's acquitted. It's self-defense. And if you read through this, and I'm quoting the Marshfield Mail it's Septoberfest, September 9th, 1897. This happened the Monday before. So you can look it up on newspapers.com and you can see it. And you can read through this testimony. And it's sort of, it's kind of 2 different stories.
Newspapers.com. You can read all the Marshfield Mail.
You can read it up until 1949.
Cool.
And you can read all the Chronicle. There's a couple of the Democrats are on there. A couple of the, there's no Tribune on there. In fact, the only Tribune I know is at the museum, and it's immediately. Never mind.
Yeah,
we won't get into that. So this happens. So anyway, he gets acquitted of 2nd-degree murder, and then he ends up moving on. He just had shot too many people around town to really stay.
Yeah.
Now, Lee Harmon is married. The reason he was deputy sheriff is he was John Wesley Hubbard's brother-in-law. He married Hubbard's wife was Harmon, was sister to Lee and Frank Harmon.
Okay.
Now we get into the last one. This one's more up to date here, and this is the shooting of Fred Cantrell and Lester Cantrell by Ralph James in the drugstore. Now, this one is pretty interesting.
Barbershop, wasn't it?
Barbershop. I said drugstore. Yeah. I've still got drugstore on the brain because I had it in mind to tell you that Colonel Paul had a drugstore and it was a true blind tiger. So Colonel Paul, up in years, decides, since I can dispense alcohol by the gallon as a druggist, there's nothing to stop me from having a little closed off room here and selling it by the glass. And he ends up getting hauled to federal court. It was on the south side of the square here. There were 2 or 3 of them. There was another fella named Stub Blunt who had quite an operation. He was all the time in trouble.
Was this after the Prohibition or during? Or
well, it was there was you could get like beer and liquor and wine at like the Chitty House, or a couple of the hotels had beer and wine, or beer and you could buy bonded spirits. The drugstores could sell stuff like that. They could also dispense from the barrel. You know, you're still
Uh-huh.
talking about not necessarily bottling things up and
Yeah.
getting them in the bottle. You're talking about getting them by the barrel and dispensing them. So there was nothing to take them from taking cherry cordial flavoring and pure grain alcohol and making you cherry cordial liqueur and putting and selling it and saying,
But
here's your cough
this would have
syrup.
been after the prohibition?
No, this been before.
Before, okay.
Yeah, so like in 1900, Colonel Paul got all
Okay.
kinds of trouble for
I
that.
see.
I wonder if it had started in the back of. Some of these things are fueled by alcohol, as we're getting ready to see here.
Yeah, no good.
So this is October of 1936, and Ralph James is constable of Ozark Township. He and Fred and Lester Cantrell, cousins. Fred is a stock buyer, and Fred and Ralph James earlier that day had bought some livestock, some heifers, I think.
Right.
And they have disagreed or argued on either how to split them up or how to price them out amongst themselves. Okay. So while they're at the sale, James produces a pistol and threatens. He has been drinking. He produces a pistol, threatens Cantrell. Somebody takes the pistol away from him and puts him back, and they split. So later, Fred, I think, picks up Lester, and they're parked over at the Sim Rice Barber Shop on the southeast corner of the square.
That's where Ruth's Flowers is, or next to it, right there in that.
Is that where it
That's
was?
where it was
Okay.
at, yeah.
I was wondering. I was
Tom
hoping
Farr
somebody
mentioned
you would either. Okay.
Tom mentioned it.
So evidently, Ralph James comes in the back door of the barber shop. Fred Cantrell is in the chair, and Lester Cantrell has just finished. And he is saying to Lester, come out here, I want to talk to you a minute. And Lester says no. And he turns. He sees that he pulls a pistol out. Lester turns to run. He gets shot in the elbow and coming out right here in the wrist. In fact, they had to do a very difficult surgery to get the ball out to keep him so he'd have use of his hand. And he takes another one in the shoulder. Here's the part that just blows my mind. Fred Cantrell has slumped down in the chair and rolled off in the floor to get out of the way. Ralph James walks by and just shoots him right in the stomach. Then cocks the hammer and goes click right at his head. And it says that, let's see, who was the Clint McNabb, who was another barber who was in there at the time. I'm almost certain I knew who Clint McNabb was. I couldn't place him now, but like I was introduced to Clint McNabb. So Clint McNabb disarms him, pins him against the wall. James gets free, goes to the front door. Because mind you, Lester Cantrell has dove in the back of his car by this time, is hiding, and tells Semrush, you better call the sheriff. And he walks across the street to Shields Drugstore, and he was picked. Bally Day gets him, Ralph Day. Picks him up right there, and then he goes on he's jailed. Now, here's the thing. That's attempted murder, at the very least.
Right.
And by the way, Fred Cantrell almost didn't make it. It was a serious touch and go deal for a week.
Right.
And then he recovers.
Yeah.
So, but he gets a year in the county jail and serves 8 months.
James.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As long as he gets out, as long as he will not carry a pistol and refrain from liquor.
Now, the James family, I would assume he would be part of the same James family, the jeweler and kin to Edwin Hubble, or
I haven't really looked at that yet. If he's Jeff James's son or
cousin, nephew, or something.
His daughter, one or two of his daughters get married while he's in jail.
Yeah.
So,
But I think Edwin Hubble's mother was a James, if I'm not mistaken.
I think that's right.
There's a connection there. Well, that's getting a little bit closer because Tom Farr mentioned that particular instance. He didn't mention names, but he certainly knew the story, and
Yeah.
He would have been a boy when that happened.
Well, he would have lived just up the road.
Yeah.
He would have lived up there about where the health unit is.
Yeah.
So, but no, that just crazy how I mean, you get 8 months.
Yeah. It is. It's
Because
it's hard to imagine.
yeah,
People took
it was
justice into their
deliberate.
hands.
It's pretty deliberate after you've already shot a guy in the stomach
Yeah.
and you go up and point it right in his head and you go shoot him again.
But there again, if he was friends and he was a known person around here and with the judges, and I mean, you know, all those things that play
Oh, I know.
today played back then.
Yeah.
Now your granddad was a judge, right?
Mhm. He was justice of the peace and elected justice of the peace in like 1936. I came here in 31. He was from Springfield. He had he kind of an interesting story.
And this was Cline here.
Yeah, this is Cline Herren. Cline champion Herren Senior.
Yeah, senior.
So he was severely crippled at the age of 11, 9,
Polio or
something
something.
with polio.
Yeah.
And he was crippled in the arms and in the legs, and he was bedridden for the better part of 3 years.
Wow.
In that time, he devoured everything he could read. He graduated high school when he was 16 and college when he was 20.
Wow.
And he was, in fact, he probably spoke at least 3 languages that Dad said, because he could read. He could read Latin, he could read Greek, he could read French, and he could read, strangely enough, he could read Dutch.
Huh.
Some Dutch.
Did he attend this building? What is
No. He's from way up in DeKalb County.
Oh, I
up in
see.
Northeast
I see.
or northwest.
They moved here after he was grown then.
Yeah, his father was a surgeon, and they had lived, and he had worked at several of the large hospitals in like Sioux City, Iowa,
Yeah.
Galveston, Texas, and he was doing surgery at Burge in Springfield, and he was in private practice down on St. Louis Street.
I see. Okay.
And then my grandfather passed the bar, read law with Gene Deemer, who in fact helped Deemer edit the Springfield Democrat.
Okay.
For quite a while, and then he was doing legal work for Deemer in Marshfield, and he really kind of liked Marshfield.
Yeah.
And so they moved to here and lived in the old rooming house that was where Larvy's warehouse ended up coming right there.
Yeah.
Lived there, and then ended up living in a little shack out here out west of town out there, or east of town. Where Doug Atkinson has part of the land.
Yeah.
They had 11 acres there.
I see.
And I had a cow. And the funniest thing is about newspapers.com is I go in and I just look at Grandpa's name. It's on everything, because then he was probate judge, and then they combined with the 1940 Constitution. He was elected probate judge in 1940, which was you still have law practice. You still did all your regular lawyering. You just didn't take probate cases. And so then in the 40s Constitution.
45. It was 45. That's when the new Constitution.
Okay. They combined probate and magistrate judge together.
Yeah.
And so then he was real busy because he handled all the misdemeanors, all the, for the county.
So he would have been Marshfield's judge in those late 40 years.
He wouldn't have been the city judge.
No,
County.
I meant the county.
Yeah.
The circuit judge.
Right. He was justice of the peace, which was for the township.
Okay.
From
And then
37 to 40.
Now, was he a state rep too?
Mm-mm.
No. Okay.
No.
That was the Popes. That was Icy Bay Pope.
No, yeah.
Jim Pope's-
Right.
So did he basically retire from?
No, he
as a
died in
judge?
office.
He died in office.
He died in office in 1966. He was going to be running for re-election in 60. I think November 66.
So Lewis Childers took his place.
No. So Teasdale appointed Hosmer,
Oh, okay.
And John had such an axe to grind at that point in the courthouse that just didn't really function, and so he didn't win re-election.
Yeah.
It was and then
Well, I remember.
I think that's
remember
when
John's
Herman
problem.
Childress. That's when Herman
Lewis.
Childress,
Yeah.
not Herman. Herman.
Yeah.
Herman. Lewis. Lewis, I think, then took that.
Yeah.
job.
That wouldn't have been Teasdale. That would have been Hearns. Warren Hearns was the governor in the 60s.
Yeah, I guess
Yeah.
it would.
Teasdale was in. Teasdale. Kent Bond got elected in 72.
That's right. Teasdale was way after what?
And then Teasdale beat him in 76 after Watergate. There wasn't a Republican who could win anything.
Yeah.
And then in 80, Kent Bond came back and won.
Yeah.
He beat Teasdale.
You
So
should have
there
seen
was
it
a-
in
there was a
34. Read those 34 election returns. They are, I mean, the Republican Party was too dead to skin.
Yeah.
And
Well, Mr. Fayenne, Jane and Martha's father,
Mhm.
which would be old Judge Fayenne's son, right?
grandson.
He was the state rep in the 30s during the Depression.
Yeah. Yeah.
And like you said, the Democrats were in charge of everything.
He was the state rep up. I bet you he was in there better part of 15 years because he was up in there some of the 40s as well.
I don't know about that. I've done a little bit of research.
You think
there.
so?
Yeah. There was a guy named Murray Thompson,
Yeah.
Republican,
Heard of him.
that came in and was in there for a while. But yeah, Mr. Fine was in the 30s during the Depression. And his pictures on the walls up there, I would always take Marshall people to show him his picture. It's on the 4th floor, because all the class pictures are up there in the Capitol. But yeah, it's interesting how economic times flip the.
That's right. And R.W. Fayenne, he died in 1896, I think.
His wife was in the tornado, right?
His first wife was. And then he married again. He's buried up at Lebanon.
Okay.
And Harry, his son, is too. Harrison Fayenne.
Okay.
He's buried up there too. He died just maybe a year or two after his father. He died maybe in around 1900.
Okay.
And he wasn't that old. He was in his 30s.
We're going to get Ken Thompson on here and talk about the whole Fayenne family.
Yeah, which it's
Awesome.
truly an interesting.
It is. Sophia.
It's a fantastic saga.
If you look at the plat map that hangs in the courthouse space,
Oh, yeah.
1905, I think. Sophia Fayenne, her husband had already died. She owns land all around Marshfield.
That's probably Harrison Fayenne's
Widow,
Fayenne's
probably,
widow.
yeah. But
So-
she, I think, would have been the mother of Bob.
Right. One thing I want to say, I haven't had a chance to
Yeah.
follow up with this in public, is the fort at Marshfield.
Yeah, let's talk about the fort.
I wrote an article about it
Mhm.
a while back called "The Fort Beneath Our Feet," and Greg Wadley in Springfield, who can just about find anything, found in the Marshfield Mail, and I have looked, remnants of old stockade dug up. Now, this is from July 28th, 1927. And guess what? The Marshfield Oil Company,
Yeah.
in excavating for gas tanks for the Marshfield Oil Company station on the south side of the square, workmen uncovered some heavy timbers and a number of old-time musket balls.
That's what you'd been looking for.
Yes.
For
And I don't
several
know.
months.
I mean, I hunted all over Hell's Half Acre for that thing and never even came close.
Well, Greg, I want to give Greg a shout out. So Greg is the brother-in-law to Connie Galbraith, who happens to be my cousin, and his wife Lucinda, Greg's wife Lucinda, Connie's sister, my cousin. But Greg, he has done a lot of work on Frisco,
Wire Road.
the old Wire Road. He worked for the railroad, I think, for years.
Well, his dad did too.
Yeah, and he's got a lot of information about that. I've actually invited him on the show. He hadn't decided to come on yet, but they live
Come on, Greg, you can do it.
They live in Springfield now. He and Lucinda, but he would be a great show. And but I'm glad that he found that for you, because I know you'd been looking for.
Well, I don't know. I had searched stockade, and I had searched, and I think sometimes, particularly when there's a little bit of fading or whatever, they just don't pick up.
Yeah,
You just have to.
yeah.
And so he found it, and I'm grateful for that. Thank you, Greg.
Now let's think about this for a minute. So 1927, that was 1 year after Route 66 was born. 1926.
You needed a gas station.
And
there on
all
the
and
square.
all of these little stations, which by the way, we're moving the one station from the Niagara River back into Marshfield to save it. That was a 1920 some model. All this, the oil industry was born in that era, and they were putting service stations because these old vehicles they wouldn't go forever. There were service stations being built by these entrepreneurs. Mr. Phillips out of Oklahoma, the Phillips 66 guy, all up and down Route 66. And so at that time, someone had the foresight. Marshfield Oil Company was born.
Well,
and they built that station right on the
That's
square,
right.
which was City Route 66.
Yeah. And if you think about it, where the We Dug In was, there
Yeah.
was a service station.
Oh yeah.
Then there was a service station right there on that one, an old timey service station where that rock wall sat, or that concrete
Right.
wall.
Right.
Well,
that's where
I don't remember the We Dug
No.
In selling gas.
That's where the station was. The We Dug In building was not. There was just the one.
The We Dug In sold gas in like the early first days.
Yeah, the little building you're talking about. That's where the rock wall was. That's where the concrete. That was the back wall of the building. That building stood when I was a boy.
So
your brother Doug will remember that.
Well, I remember the building too.
And the Robs. See, the Robs owned the liquor store out by Route 66.
Yeah.
Which become I-44. When they built the overpass, the Spur Cafe was out there.
Mhm.
On the south side, there where you entered Marshfield, the
Mhm.
Robs had a liquor store.
Right.
Well, when they built the overpass, they bought the state bought that land and took that building out. So they moved down there to that location and built the new We Dug In building that you and I
Right.
knew as the We Dug
So
In.
I'm talking
Not
about
that you ever went in there before you were 21, but
hard to
you
say.
But anyway, that building was built, but that little building was still there next to it, and that had been the We Dug In. And they sold, from the stories that I've been told, they sold groceries or novelties, and then they sold pump gas.
Dad said they had food in there.
Yeah, and then later on, after the Route 66 bypass was built, the four lanes that became 44. That building closed up. It actually became a barber shop. Sue Eichert sent me a message the other day after one of the shows, and there was a barber that worked in there, and and it was her dad, I believe, Mr. Price, who had also been LaRue Letterman's. She was a sister to Sue. Their dad, Alicia Letterman, that I went to school with, Alicia Woody, and Terry Letterman, and that would have been their granddad. He had a barber shop in that building. And Tom Farr remembered the barbershop as well. So, but it was vacant
when I was a kid.
Yeah, the
it was
traffic
painted
had already
lime green.
bypassed.
It was painted lime green. And
colonial red door on it.
Yeah.
And all that. Yeah, absolutely. And that back wall that we.
So when was the We Dug In that we were familiar with, or maybe not? When was it built? Where up on the other side of the road?
I'm going to say the late 60s or maybe around 70. Well, when they built the overpass.
Well, it would have been, you could go across Buffalo Street.
That's right.
And you could drive across.
That's right. Because it wasn't interstate yet.
It still would have been pretty handy.
Yeah, it would have. Because you had the Crossroads Cafe out there at W.
Yeah, that's right.
That's right. And then you also had Jefferson Street that crossed on the west. That was 38 Highway, and it crossed.
Right.
So you had 3 crossings. And of course, when they put the overpass in, Marshfield got cheated and got one overpass. The largest town on I-44 in the state of Missouri with one way to get on and off.
Yeah.
Mount Vernon's got 4 or 5 and did from day one. And they're smaller than we are and about the same distance from Springfield. So, anyway.
Preach, Lyndall.
Yeah. Well, we did.
tell you,
We did preach, and we got another overpass.
Well, yeah, it took a little bit. But
It
we
did.
finally got it done.
It took a little bit.
All right. What else do you want to know?
Well, you
about
just
here?
continue to share. Time flies. We've only got 9 minutes left.
9 minutes.
Yeah.
Man.
But you want to tell? I know what I want to ask you.
Okay.
Your Masonic Lodge. So, one of the other times you were on, we talked about the lodge quite a bit, which you guys have done a tremendous job for the community down there. And you had another gumbo dinner here the other day.
Week ago.
Yeah, but you got your roof on.
Tell us about that.
So
Because you were fundraising for a roof when we were on
we
a year ago.
yeah. So we put a roof on. To recap, we put a roof on basically 16, 17 years ago.
Mhm.
It was made for everything but baseball size or bigger hail.
Yeah.
And it was, as I remember, there's a foam element to it and a sealer, and it punched straight through down.
Yeah.
And so we didn't really have any damage per se because the thing already leaked. And so we just, but we decided to go with a pitch to it.
Yeah.
Now, I don't think that any of us kind of pictured how much pitch was going to be put on that
Yeah.
when we first talked about it. But boy, throw the water off now. Throw it clear to the railroad tracks. So
But anyway, you got it. You raised the money.
Yeah.
You were able to get it done. That's
short
good.
from looking like the Rock of Prudential, yeah, we're all done.
Well, that's
Taken
good.
care of.
That's
So
good.
we're very thankful to the community for helping us with that.
Yeah, absolutely.
But do you know where Webster County's first or second courthouse, the first one they really built? Do you know where that was? I'm just testing you.
Well, okay, let's make sure we're on the same page.
So the very, very first courthouse was at Hazelwood.
Yeah.
Where they first met.
Right.
They
I'm not talking
determined-
about that one.
And then just in
The first one that they
they
built.
actually built it was not the center of the square, but it was around the square.
That's correct.
But I can't tell you where.
Well, it's about where Tom Sprague's office is.
Okay, east
Or well,
side.
I guess it's not Tom. I guess it's
Freeman's, Davison Spriggs.
yeah, Davison Spriggs, and my office is right there.
Yeah,
and it
yeah.
was a 20 by 40 foot log structure, 2-story,
Okay.
and the Union Army burned it down. The Union Army burned the jail down. We had a log jail, and they burned it down because we kept locking them up when they would tear something up.
Yeah.
And in fact, then the courthouse burned because they were building fire up against it to get out of the wind, and it caught fire. But everybody got, except the safe, they got everything out. All the records and everything they got out of the courthouse.
Mm-hmm.
So
The log one you're talking
yeah,
about.
the log one. So that was built right. That was right there on the square.
Okay.
And then the new jail, or the new jail, the brick jail then
Uh-huh.
was built after the Civil War,
Where the post office is.
where the post office is now. Yeah.
And the center of the square courthouse, and the first one, which was a red brick one, was then built after the fire, the log.
Yeah,
cabin
it started. They started that in the late 1860s, and I don't think it was completed until like it would have had to have been completed by 1872 because they convicted Charles Waller in there.
I think it's interesting that, and I just kind of forgot till I was just looking at this book a bit before you came in. But so Marshfield was actually designed, developed. The 60 acres was purchased from Mr. Burford to be the county seat.
I
Because
think he donated.
because Webster County had been formed from parts of Wright County, Greene County, and Dallas County.
To correct curvature of the earth on the map.
Is that what it was?
Yeah. There was so when I was on the Board of Aldermen, there came up a no man's land that the Robertsons owned. It's a little boot-shaped
Uh-huh.
property, kind of like that. And Dad had told me years ago that all the corrections that didn't actually work out
Yeah.
ended up north of the square on that Robertson
No
lot
kidding.
between there and the park, kind of
Okay.
a no man's
Uh-huh.
land.
And your dad was a surveyor, so
Yeah.
you would know that.
Well, yeah, and so the 1880 survey of Webster County is off, and it's off pretty good.
Yeah.
And in some places, like on our farm, it's a lot of our stuff's off.
Well,
Since technology though, and since
Right.
they're constantly updating and getting it closer all the time.
So yeah, so everything's being redone. The but no, Webster County. That's why it looks like two boxes sitting on top of one
There's an
another.
adjustment.
That was to adjust for curvature of the earth.
Yeah, and that's one of those lines is out there between Northview and Stratford. On the north side of 44, it's up here, and on the other side it's here. I mean, the line doesn't line
Yeah.
up exactly. That's where
Yeah,
that's
it's
where one of those
offset.
is.
Yeah.
But anyway, so Marshfield was developed to be the county seat, which I
Mhm.
think is really interesting. And so they platted it out and with the square to become the location of the courthouse. And
Mhm.
I just think it's interesting because most of these towns wouldn't have been that way probably.
Well, I don't know. I mean, when you think about it, he owned all of the land south, and he owned a good deal of land to the north and to the west.
Mr. Burford.
Yeah, why wouldn't you put the county seat in the one high spot right in the middle of it all?
That's true. We're in the center of the county.
Because you're gonna eventually develop a town around it.
Yeah.
I mean,
And the main road from St. Louis to Springfield was Faulkner's Hill, right? Coming down through.
well, okay, the railroad went to Rolla,
Yeah, but I'm talking about before the
and
road.
then
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
and
before
then the
railroad.
wire road from Springfield to Rolla would have been your main artery,
Yeah,
and then you would
which
have the
was north
Springfield
of the road.
Harrison Road.
Which was northern Webster County.
Yeah, it cuts. I think of it as northwest because it really only cuts off kind of a corner.
Yeah, but it comes across their Marlin country and
Sure.
Faulkner's Hill and beach and all that.
Yeah. Well, living south of the James River, we just don't pay any account to anything up north of Marshfield.
Well, for many years there was quite a rivalry, but I think that kind of went away in about the 80s, maybe the 70s.
Yeah, I don't know.
There used to be.
I don't know.
40. I tell you what, when I-44 was built, it changed everything because that's when your small town, people driving through town, they didn't stop anymore. You had the interstate, and everything migrated to the interstates. If you think about it.
Thank you, President Eisenhower.
Well, I mean, it's true though. You know, the downtowns died for a while.
Oh, they did.
Fortunately, there's been a lot of revitalizations and ways to draw people back.
Yeah,
but it certainly did for many, many years. You know.
Everything that's old becomes new again.
It does. It does.
Just
I was
in
in the
wait
mall.
around and see it.
I was in the mall this week, and I'd been in the mall in months, maybe years.
Isn't it awful?
Well, it is, but you know what?
It's just depressing.
No. I'm gonna tell you something. How long has it been since you've been in the mall?
Oh, probably 3 or 4 years.
Okay, you need to go because it's different. It's actually reviving somewhat.
Really?
You've got a lot of those buildings with little boutique shops now that are nice.
Are they all major like
No.
national brands?
No.
Okay, that's different.
No, they're not.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm saying. It surprised me because the last time I'd been in there was a lot of vacant stores.
Right.
There's not. And there was some activity, and it was a weekday. So I don't know. I guess there's hope for anything. We got a minute.
Probably it was mainly older people walking.
No, not really. No, there was just some activity.
Of course, older's
There's
relative.
coffee shops, and there's bakery shops and
That's
things
great.
like that. That's different, but
Yeah.
it was just I just thought it looked different to me than the last time I was in.
They're gonna dump all of us Gen Xers in there when we're old. They're gonna have an arcade and a food court.
Well, let me tell you something, son. You're going to get older quicker than you think.
Yeah, I hope they get that food court built.
Because me and your older brother, we're now the senior citizen generation.
I know. I'm not.
And,
I'm just half started.
yeah. Well, it's been fun, champ, as it always is, and you have an open invitation to come back anytime.
Thank you. We enjoy it.
We do have some guests lined up. I always hesitate to mention who they might be because sometimes things change and they can't make it. But I think we've got some guests the next 3 weeks that everyone will enjoy. So please stay tuned.
Give them some
For
clues.
Well,
You don't have to say it. Give them, then you can always deny it.
they're not always firmed up. There's one in particular I'm hoping to have that is not firmed up yet, but here's the hint I'll give. Next week is Lincoln Days in Webster County. It happens to be in our gymnasium right here on this campus on March 22nd. This campus. So we'll have some higher elected officials attending this. There's been confirmation from some. Regardless of your party or whatever, they're still elected and they're still our representation. So
possibility we might be able to get one on our show and talk a little bit
Excellent.
about what's going on. And that's what we're trying to work on there. Plus, I have a couple of other guests lined up that everyone will enjoy. So we appreciate the support. Stay tuned. Keep tuning in. Subscribe if you like. It looks nice when we have subscribers. Doesn't cost anything. And last week, I don't know if you know this, but I did a show on all of our previous guests, and I had a lot of good.
Yes, I missed that.
Had a lot of good input about doing that. Because now you can go to that show and you can find dates like the 2 times you were on. You can put a date and a name, and then you can go back to YouTube and Google that date and name with Marshfield Old School Times, and they'll be able to watch your show, and they'll know what dates they are. So
I know we talked about the Masonic Lodge one time. I
Uh-huh.
don't remember what we talked about the other time. I think it was about folk beliefs.
I think we did, and
Yeah.
basically you in general, like first time you were on, who you were, and being the town rat when you were a kid.
Yeah.
You talked about that
Yeah,
north of the
pretty
square,
much.
running around. So
Pretty much.
anything else you want to share?
No, just enjoyed. Thank you
All
for
right.
having me.
All right, come back anytime.
Appreciate it.
We'll see you all next week. Everybody have a good week, and let's pray and keep all of those that were affected by the devastation last night in our thoughts and prayers. I know down in the Boot Hill there was some major destruction and maybe even some fatalities. So with that, we'll leave it with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Are we off?
Just about.